Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss political choices when it comes to budgets. Jeremy Hunt is gearing up for his big pre-election budget in 1 week's time, but the SNP have presented their budget in Holyrood as well, and both parties have attracted criticism, although for very different reasons. You could say it's an inevitable consequence of tough economic times that people will not be very positive about your budget, but are there choices which could be made and still work politically? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So both the Tories and the SNP are under pressure over their budget. This Scottish budget has been criticised for cutting funding for housing and freezing council tax. And the Tories are under pressure in a different way. Their MPs and client media want to see huge tax cuts, though they aren't entirely keen on seeing vote-losing spending cuts being part of the package in election year. They seem to be expecting Hunt to carry out some sort of miracle where he hides the payback for Labour to find on the other side of the election. And there will, of course, be some of that. The latest is that Hunt probably has about £18 billion of what's called fiscal headroom. He can probably announce a net cut to taxes, in this case, of £18 billion without performing a Kwasi Kwarteng style bed-shitting exercise. That would allow him to cut the basic rate of income tax by 2p, as a lot of Tory MPs are wanting, and still have a few £1 billion left over. So all's looking good then, is it? Well, not quite. The cut to income tax is fine, and a lot of Tory MPs want that. But what they really want is tax cuts which will help out the super rich as well. They want to abolish inheritance tax. They want to cut corporation tax. They want to provide more tax breaks for businesses and corporations who donate to them. There's not really the fiscal headroom for that. Even the income tax cut won't be sustainable, according to experts. Although the Tories don't care about that, they just want to announce a load of tax cuts without crashing the economy before the election. Anything that happens after it, they don't care about. They can leave Labour to worry about how to make the figures add up afterwards. But if Hunt makes a miscalculation and spooks the market, as happened towards the end of 2022, the Tories really will be finished. In fact, there's been a number of warnings in the media for Hunt to tread very carefully. They know he has some room for tax cuts, but that his party is demanding more than is sensible. And we are just 1 week away from finding out what he intends, and then I suppose a few days after that to gauge the reaction of the market. There is a fear that Hunt, because he's not really able to offer his party what they want, that he will sail very close to the wind to do the best he can. All it would take is a slight miscalculation on his part, and it could be Bank of England to the rescue again as pension pots take another battering. So both the SNP and Tories under pressure for different reasons. The SNP have not cut taxes and not trying to cut taxes. In fact, they've increased taxes for the wealthier people, with the upper rate of income tax applying when you're earning over £75,000 rather than the £125,000 in the rest of Britain. Shouldn't be as controversial as it has been, because you consider it's median incomes and the average cost of living in Scotland is lower than in the parts, particularly in the south of England, where people might think, well, you'd struggle on £75,000 a year, wouldn't you? Mind you, there are still people on minimum wage who live in those areas, so maybe people should consider that when complaining. But the point is that the SNP have not been thinking of cutting taxes, but have gone along with an economic doctrine, and they've cut spending in order to get the budget to balance. But is it all they could do? You know, the Daily Record, which I will point out is a Labour supporting paper, by the way, they argued that because council tax is favoured by the rich, which it is, they should just replace it with something more fit for purpose, which I would be fully in support of. But perhaps the SNP and Scottish Greens worry that such a radical change would meet too much political opposition. I've often thought myself, and I've even said on this channel, if, the Tories backing Labour into too tight a corner, they think they're salt in the earth when it comes to budgets like this. Surely they just risk Labour saying, right, well, we're not just going to limp through this parliament and then lose the next election because we can't do anything. So extreme circumstances call for extreme measures, and then they just reform our taxation system to deal with it. And then the Tories are left going, oh no. For example, replacing council tax with a more progressive system. But would it be a political trap? Because I liken it to the inheritance tax trap. Only 4% of people in this country will pay inheritance tax. Really is for the very wealthy. About half of all the people who send their kids to private school won't pay inheritance tax. 7% of people go to private school, right? 4% of people pay inheritance tax. So that means you've actually got a lot of people who can afford to send their kids to private school. They're still not wealthy enough to pay inheritance tax. That's how rich you have to be to pay it. But according to polling, there's about a third of people in the country think they will pay inheritance tax. That is the problem with fusing politics and taxation. You can look at this, change the taxes to this and it will benefit all these people. It'd be marvellous. The problem is when people think they will suffer from a tax policy when they won't. So what you need to do in tough economic times is you need to raise more money because you don't want to skimp on investment. So you need to raise more money without making ordinary people think that they'll be the ones with the bill. And one solution that is often called for is to simply hire more tax inspectors. There's been another article in The Guardian recently. You get these every now and then. It brought together the General Secretary of the TUC and the founder of a retail business to call for more tax collectors, citing that £36 billion a year just goes uncollected. That could buy you a 5p cut in income tax and still give you change left over. Not that I think we should be cutting income tax at all. In fact, not just me. Polling shows that even Conservative voters think that the government can't really afford to cut taxes right now. Because look at it this way. If Jeremy Hunt has £18 billion to play with, say, and more tax collectors could bring in an additional £36 billion, that's an additional £54 billion you've got. What could you do with that? Well, let's see what needs doing. We could make acceptable pay offers to NHS staff, putting an end to strikes. We could rebuild collapsing schools and hospitals. We could build more affordable houses. We could fund more people from poor backgrounds to be able to study useful degrees at university without taking on the debts which often puts them off. So a way of not necessarily cancelling all tuition fees, but cancelling it for people from poor backgrounds who don't have parents who've been to university themselves. Get more people into particularly for degrees where we need them. Get more doctors, dentists. If the Gammons want fewer immigrants in the NHS, invest in more people from the UK training for medical qualifications. Same applies to other sectors of our economy as well. Because if you're anti-immigration, but you're also anti-education, you're actually in favour of us not having an NHS at all, aren't you? But I digress. All of these things would boost the economy, meaning that the government could bring in more tax revenues later on without putting any taxes up, to fund yet more investment, which carries on doing the same. To someone on the median income in the UK, because this is what the Tories are going to... Next week, Jeremy Hunt almost certainly is going to announce this 2p cut in income tax, the basic rate of income tax. Oh, this will affect everyone. This will be marvellous for ordinary people. Do you know how marvellous it is for ordinary people, this 2p tax cut? For someone on the median income, and remember that's way above minimum wage, on the median income, like what we call an ordinary worker, it's worth less than £6 a week to them. Ask them if they would prefer to have the £6 or be able to get an appointment with the doctor or be seen in A&E for themselves or their family when they need it, or be able to access affordable housing. Because if that £54 billion were to be used for, say, council housing, you could build about 500,000 homes for social housing with that money alone. Yet the Tories would prefer to let 2/3 of that amount just go uncollected and work out how best to cut taxes with the rest. If the government really wanted to save people money, they'd have applied proper windfall taxes to the profiteers, like British Gas, with their 943% increase in profits in the last year alone, and used the money to lower energy bills. That would have put a few quid extra in people's pockets without sacrificing investment in our national infrastructure. Budgets are always about choices. Now, you don't have as much free choice as some people will claim. You will see over the next week and beyond experts. They will be economists, and they will say, oh, the government could have chosen to do this and this and this and this. And some of those choices aren't real, because you have to work in the real world where you recognise that a lot of voters think they will suffer from a tax policy more than they actually will. Some of them will benefit from a tax policy, but can still believe they'll suffer from it. That is just the nature of our mainstream media feeding people lies. But there are still choices within that, as I alluded to with the SNP budget. There are always political constraints. It's not enough to make the right choices. You have to be seen to be making the right choices. I don't believe that the SNP or the Scottish Greens are anti-housing. So cutting funding for housing must be a political choice. Squeezing council budgets, which will result in some local services being scaled back. Again, that is not part of the core belief of SNP or Green voters or supporters. Yet they're freezing council tax. Again, that will be because they think they're politically trapped by it. The Tories are a very different beast. They're not cutting taxes for political reasons, but ideological ones. They would attract more votes by building than cutting. In fact, in order to try to increase his fiscal headroom, guess what Hunt's proposing? The reports are suggesting he's going to make up entirely new taxes. Yes, you got that right. In order to present what he will call a tax-cutting budget, he's going to create taxes which don't currently exist. But in true Tory style, he'll apply those taxes to people he doesn't think of as important voters. For example, I think there's going to be a new tax specifically for vaping products. So what the Tories are doing here is saying they're cool with the idea of moving taxes around. Oh, we'll put more taxes on this so that we can drop taxes off this. That's moving taxation around. That's cutting taxes in one place and raising it in another. So once you're fine with that, you'd think, so if only you could work out that you can cut them for ordinary people and raise them for the wealthy instead of the other way around. Or better still, you don't have to cut them at all. Just spend the taxes on investment, then people make sure that everyone gets a share in that. It just the extra GDP doesn't go into private profits, that people share in that in terms of better pay, and then people can make more money. They can afford that tax rate and still have more disposable income to support British businesses. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.